I hope you enjoyed the power of the Doctor. I must say, I did, for many reasons, but one particular one was, it went out. It was no longer a secret I had to keep, that I was in it. It's a miracle I kept that secret. I'm not very good at keeping secrets. I could never be a spy. Anyway, happy birthday, happy 100th birthday to the BBC, one of the great broadcasting companies in history. And next year is the 60th birthday of Doctor Who. I'll be watching it. I hope you do too.
It's time for Type 40, your Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hadley, Birmingham's king of the geeks, designated driver and mouth runner, sense maker. God, that's a big claim, isn't it, with this sense maker aboard this thing. And whether you're new to the show or a frequent flyer, I can guarantee you sparkling, crackling conversation on our free-speaking, big-thinking show for everyone, whatever decade or century you started watching, reading, or listening along to those ongoing adventures of our hero, Doctor Who. We talk about it all on this show. All opinions are valid, and we may even throw in a few laughs along the way. Who knows? So come and step into our TARDIS and share this journey together here with us on Type 40. Yes, and here we are for another monumental edition of the show. And who better to accompany me on this journey than the guy who started it all with me way back when, over 100 episodes ago. So going to reconnect with him again. It's the culture clashing, the true believing, Mr. Kyle Wagner.
So I have a question on this podcast.
Here we go.
Is what is new old again, or is what is old new again? I'm confused because what?
Can we not start with one of the smaller questions? Just don't ask me what was going on with this.
I don't know either. But no, I'm excited. It's a new era. It's the close of one and the start of a new, and I think it's more than time, and I think it's going to be a very interesting time for Doctor Who, but I think it's one that's going to be filled with a lot of positivity, which is something I know the Whoverse desperately needs these days.
Yeah, there was a moment there, wasn't there, which I'm sure we'll get into on the show, where the time zones sort of seem to fuse at this precise nexus point. That's Star Trek, though, isn't it? Nexus points, but at a fixed point, and then all of a sudden, sort of one state of affairs quickly became another, before our heads could stop spinning. We're going to get into all of that as the show goes along. So it's an element of taking out the trash, but definitely the element of a new beginning too, I think.
Real quick, Mr. Hadley, too, that picture of the TARDIS you had up, nothing would be more appropriate if the 14th Doctor walks in and goes, no, this will never do. When he sees that.
Take all that down. Yeah.
I need my dots back. I need my circles back.
Who knows? Who knows what's coming next? I know that the little bits are already starting to filter down, about what's to come in the relatively near future and in the quite distant future. So over the next 12 to 18 months. And between us, we try and be all over it. It's next to impossible because there's so much of it that comes at us from different places, on social media, on legacy media, and from new media. And between us, we like to, we try and get a grasp of it all, but we can't possibly do it alone. I think we need, it's only right that we have with us, she's been with us throughout, from series 13 right the way through those 2 terrible specials earlier in the year. It's only right that we wrangle her back and demand that she tries to help us through, guide us through the very last Jodie Whittaker special. Welcome back, Charlotte Shields.
I'm not going to lie. I've had friends who watched it afterwards say, "What did that mean? What happened there?" So I'm used to helping people understand what on earth happened in that episode.
Was your phone buzzing as it was going?
Remember, you charge per information request.
I should, shouldn't I?
But there is a feeling of it gradually sort of being cleansed by it all, I think. And I think whatever we felt about the special, I can't wait to hear what you've got to say in particular, Cox. I know nothing about what you've got to say, but the last time Charlotte and I spoke, it was quite intentional. We'd both seen it and we were sort of splurging out our instant reactions. But
yes.
Now we've had a little time to sort of to live with it all and to see the media reaction and to try and make some sense of it, try and stitch it all together. All the bits that appeared to not make any sense at all. We've had a few days to see, was it something we missed or something they forgot to tell us? We're bound to get stuck into that. And we do have a fourth voice, I'm happy to say, or a fourth mind. That's probably more apt because this guy, he is no stranger to the conundrums of continuity. And he's the showrunner, I suppose you could say, of a whole line of audio Doctor Who stories, unofficial Doctor Who stories that have this sort of epic feel, really. And the beauty of it is they actually make sense too. He was also the co-writer of the very well received and much loved Doctor Who book Times Champion from, I think that was from about 10, 15 years ago, something like that he co-wrote with Craig Hinton, the late Craig Hinton. So I'm delighted to welcome back to Type 40, Chris McKeon from Black Glove Studio.
Thank you for having me, and good morning, everyone. At least it's morning for me.
It's good morning for you, is it?
Yeah, morning for me still here too. So.
It is, and I have to say, I will say one little preview of what I'm thinking about this story. I'm wondering if he read Times Champion stole the climax.
Well, I was going to say, Chris, I understand Mr. Chibnall is looking for a job. Or you have any open positions over at Black Glove?
I have a very strict, high standards hiring process.
Well, it's funny you mention that, Chris, because even if he hasn't directly lifted from Times Champion,
yes,
I'd find it difficult to believe because he seems to have lifted from absolutely everything else in this 90 minutes. I don't even call things like this Easter eggs. I would classify them as plain steals. And yeah, there are moments that the fans are going to go, oh, that's from this, that's from that. But there's a fine line between homages and pastiches and just plain nicking something, isn't there? Because you need it to fuel your story. And between us, I'm hoping that in between having a few giggles at the power of the Doctor, we can try and sort of track some of these, the things that registered with us, the things that sat well, because this wasn't, for a change, this wasn't an absolute disaster. So the things that sat well and the things that didn't, and that which sort of inspires some hope with us for the future going forward. So that's all coming up, I'm happy to say. But in the meantime, I've got to remind you that if you'd like to do some real-time traveling of your own, each and every edition of this show, past, present, or future, is just a tap or two away on the device of your choice if you know where to look. There's over 100 now. Great conversations, reviews, previews, interviews, geek outs, and deep dives with all our regulars and some pretty awesome guests. In fact, we know there's something for every fan at type40.podbean.com. And there'll be more about all of that a little later on, as well as a couple of minutes where, as always, we will make contact with the matrix of all knowledge that we call the Fandom Podcast Network for a word about all the other cult conversations going on across the multitude of shows over there. Okay, now on to our main attraction, I think our final encounter with the rainbow-clad 13th Doctor and her companion Yaz. This is the longest-standing companion in Doctor Who history, believe it or not, in months, if not screen time. But yeah, once again, here we are. Time is running out for another Time Lord, and even if it's not guaranteed to make you weep, I'm thinking it'll make you pop your cork with excitement about what could possibly come and the renewal of Doctor Who. We're going to find out what the panel makes of the centenary special right now. Hold tight. Here it comes. Where are we? Here it is. Yes, so together as an audience, as a fandom, we've made it through, haven't we? Another Doctor Who era. Now, depending on when you found this show or when it found you, depends on how many of them you've rode out, doesn't it? I think lots of us have been in, particularly now that the new series of Doctor Who has been back for the best part of 2 decades. I still can't quite believe that. Lots of us have ridden out a lot of them and seen a lot of Doctors come and go. And it's true that some of us do take our leave of the series, sometimes for reasons that it's just not sitting well with us at that precise moment. Sometimes it can be that real life gets in the way, Kyle. For people who have a real life, can you imagine that?
Work or family I have no idea what you're talking about.
So sometimes people can miss in 2 or 3 seasons, not necessarily because they're out of step with the show, but simply because it's out of step with them and their own lives. But everything, what goes around sort of comes around really with Doctor Who. And I do find that when I look back and I realise that there's only 3, maybe 4 Doctors, 4 Doctors beginnings that I wasn't present for at the very beginning, never mind the end. That's a very sobering thought. So I'm not quite as moved by these affairs as once I was. But fortunately, I think in this day and age, in the 21st century, they tend to sort of jam it full with all sorts of other things because I think whoever's making it at any given point, be that Stephen Moffat, Russell T Davies, or indeed Chris Chibnall, I won't exclude him from this. They realise that this is a massive popular culture event. This time, it all ends with The Power of the Doctor by Chris Chibnall, and this was the general synopsis. It says, who is attacking a speeding bullet train on the edge of a distant galaxy? Why are seismologists going missing from 21st century Earth? Who is defacing some of history's most iconic paintings? Why is a Dalek trying to make contact with the Doctor? And just what does the mesmeric Rasputin have over Tsar Nicholas in 1916 Russia? The Doctor faces multiple threats and a battle to the death. This was originally broadcast on Sunday, the 23rd of October, 2022, and filmed throughout September and October of 2021. So a year before we actually got to see it. It was directed by Jamie Magnus Stone, who's been on the show since the beginning of Series 12, I think, Charlotte. He started with Spyfall, didn't he, Jamie?
Yes, he didn't start with Jodie's era. He was like a bit of a newer addition to it.
And I know that you really rate this guy too, don't you? But in my view, this is the director that's given a much-needed sense of personality and flavour to an era which has really struggled to hit any real beats and to grow and to flourish.
Yeah, because when you've got a dialogue that isn't working that well, when you've got actors not working that well, you need something to create emotion and mood and feeling, and he's been the one source to do that in a lot of stories where everything else hasn't. So you really notice his skill, but he is skilled. It's not just that, but it's really shown, I think, because of the lack of it around him.
It's another monumental story, Kyle. We started this journey back with Jodie Whittaker on episode 9 of Type 40 back in 2018, and we talked about the woman who fell to earth. Here we are at the end of the era. How did this how did this make you feel? Because obviously you're sitting down to watch this. You're staring down the barrel of 90 minutes of Chris Chibnall written content. You're seeing a synopsis that doesn't really tell you a lot. We knew very little going into this who was in the cast. So was it a case of you couldn't wait to see this, or more a case that you couldn't wait to get it over and done with?
I think for me, this was a combination of a little of both, because anytime there's a regeneration of the Doctor, there's always an excitement of how are they going to get there? What's going to be new? What's coming that's going to be new? On the flip side, because of what the Chris Chibnall era has been, there was also this thing of, okay, thank goodness it's over. It's time to move on and move forward. And I'm going to say it right now. This episode was so representative of the good and bad of the Chris Chibnall era, because it reflected so many things. There's some moments and there's things in this that were very good, or some very good ideas that maybe weren't fully fleshed out. And then there was just stuff that you're like, I am completely lost. What the hell is going on here? And then there's just some moments that are just like, and that sums up that's the Chibnall era, and that's been the Chibnall 13th Doctor era from the beginning. And what makes it, what I find so interesting, and I think it's more so with this Doctor than any Doctor who changed, I feel like there was a lot of genuine excitement when Jodie first was announced as the Doctor for some people, because they thought there was a chance to bring in a whole different group of people into Doctor Who, some more exposure. A lot of people love Jodie, and I even through all this experience, I want to see Jodie get a role that is more suited for her. But I've never seen it quite so too, where you've had a Doctor regeneration that everybody was so excited about too. And usually people are like, they're excited a new Doctor's coming in, but there's a depression of the Doctor going out, or a sense of loss. And I just, and there were Jodie fans out there who did feel that way. I'm not going to take that away from them.
Yeah, all six of them were gutted.
I think there was just a general thing, whether because of Jodie, of Chibnall, or whatever, just like, thank goodness this era is ending. And I think this is probably going to go down as one of the more controversial eras of the Doctor ever.
Oh, it's easily. I mean, I know somebody said to me, the most divisive era of Doctor Who is always the current one. And I see what they're saying, because as a series moves on, as an intellectual property grows, it's bound to rattle some people's chains and ruffle feathers and things like that. But in the case of this, obviously, it was a major ideological shift and a breaking of the relationship between the program maker and the audience too. It was almost like a battle cry, and I think that we as viewers, we can't help but receive that in a negative way. I think if you've been invested in something for a long time and you're being softly, you're at the very least being poked fun at, and in some cases vilified, it's bound to get people off on the wrong foot. The series initially seemed to try to mark itself out stylistically quite different. I think the irony of it is we come here to the conclusion, it's just lasted these 30 episodes, but here at the very end, I think we see the series reaching back to actual Doctor Who touchstones. And I'm not just talking about old faces either, and title conventions and those norms. I'm thinking that the flavour of the actual show itself, Sagan Akinola, this is his final episode, providing the instrumental music for the show, Chris. And, I've found some of his music I really liked at the start, but after a while it sort of drifted into a total dirge to the point where it was disconnected almost from entirely what was on screen. Here, I did feel like the music and the pictures, the direction of Jamie Magnus Stone, that was all working together. And we're at least looking at a quality production whereby people were actually talking to one another. But how did you feel about this? Had you stayed with the show right the way through to now? And what did you think about this 90-minute special?
When people ask me on occasion which is my favorite Doctor, I have always stated that I have no favorite Doctor, that I love them all equally. When Jodie Whittaker's era started, I wanted to feel the same, but as it progressed, and it expressed the situation that you've described. I amended my answer and said, well, I have no favorite Doctor, but I have a least favorite Doctor. Sadly, this episode has not changed my opinion. what I felt about the episode in brief was empty. It was empty because it almost feels like it really doesn't matter. The Doctor is leaving. We already know who's coming. The music, like you said, didn't stir me. It never has in this era because it's essentially been like one note, literally sometimes.
It was like whale music before, wasn't it? And this did at least feel kind of cinematic. Like I felt. It
felt. If it did, then it's maybe it's like you're going to a drive-in theater or something. It was it was cinematic, perhaps, but it doesn't make you feel like the screen is getting any bigger for you. It was largely just events happening, and I appreciated it. I certainly appreciated Sophie Aldred and Janet Fielding back. I think Janet Fielding did a very good job. I think Sophie Aldred was probably the best return appearance that I have seen since Nicholas Courtney came back as the Brigadier in Enemy of the Bane. The role
given that they clearly made some very obvious visual attempts to make it very clear they wanted us back. Mm-hmm. Did you feel like you were being encouraged back to this show, that you were being entertained, and that it was coming from a good place?
So I understand your question. Do it feel as if it's trying to invite me back to keep me? Because I have stuck with the Jodie Whittaker era, of course, throughout her 31 episodes, actually. But are you saying, I want to see what happens next? This is an excellent. This is really
more so that it wanted to welcome you back into the house, into the Doctor Who party, really.
Well, it didn't feel like there was a party happening in the first place, though. I mean, in this episode, I mean. The story is hanging on incredible coincidences that aren't even set up. Graham just happens to be at the volcano. Dan just happens to decide to leave at the end, acting like a little bit like he was his role in the story was perfunctory at best. So it almost felt as if the party was already over and people were being just quietly deciding to leave.
And I think it's fair to say, Chris, that when you think back, I mean, you don't even have to. Sometimes after you've watched a movie or a TV show, you think, and over the couple of hours afterwards, you think, that didn't really make sense. I wonder why that happened. I think with this, it's happening actually as you're watching it. And I think we spoke about this a little the other day, Charlotte. Things happen because the script, the show needs them to happen, rather than they feel like a real chain of events.
Yeah, nothing flows nicely in a script from this era. Because obviously all scripts have their function bits and have the bits that have to be there for, I want this to happen next. That's part of the script. But all the other eras could disguise that almost, and you almost got so caught up in the story or the characters. You forgot, this is a script. But this one I really felt, and Chris highlighted two brilliant examples of John Bishop, Dan, who's been on so many dangerous adventures up to this point, who's had his life threatened so many times. He faced a Dalek in Eve of the Daleks. He got captured by pirates last special. But suddenly now, it's too much for him. Like, Chris can't give motivation well, so he just makes things happen. And I'm not going to laugh. I'm not going to lie. I laughed out loud when Graham just appeared. Because I was just like, you've not even tried with him to give a reason. Like, you tried with
just
John.
As suddenly as Dan leaves, doesn't it? And this keeps happening throughout the piece. Exit stage right, enter stage left. And Vinda, the character from Flux, just drops out of the sky. This is, in some respects, this is not that much smoother than Flux, is it, Kyle? What do you think about this?
Okay, so there's a few things here that I'm finding absolutely hilarious with this as I'm watching this particular episode. First and foremost, we're talking about the man who basically attempted to completely rewrite Doctor Who history and now is incorporating as much Doctor Who history as he can in his final episode. So there's that right there. And I'm like, really? So, but when you talk about the Dan thing, which let's start with Dan, John Bishop. I can roll with that. It makes sense. He literally gets his helmet cracked. It's probably the closest he's come to death since joining the fam, quote unquote. And I think too, he was also kind of just in this stage where it's like, even at the end of the Sea Devil special, when he's reaching out to his old girlfriend and reconnecting. I think that felt like a little natural progression. Him leaving made sense. We've seen companions do that. Granted, 10 minutes into the episode, he should have got a chance to ride things through and then made that decision at the end of the episode. But I get it. I'm just going to pop in and out of this podcast as I feel like, because that's apparently how they write Graham now. He just appears wherever he's needed. I thought the introduction of some of the older companions was actually very well done. And of course, I know this has been popped up on Twitter and Facebook, how we might need a spin-off show of old companions that coming out of this. That would be
do you think that because in the past we've spoken about how Chris Chibnall cannot build his own characters, and is this, and we see them come and go, and even Yas, who's been there consistently throughout, she's not any more developed, particularly in this. So with this special, with the power of the Doctor, when he's reaching back to the past, the characters that other people built before him, other writers, other producers, other showrunners, in effect, and expanded media has grown them in the time in between. Is this him effectively giving up and thinking, look, I'll reach for those characters because they're the ones that are going to speak to people. They're recognizable. The actors who are playing them are already connected with them. That I'll rely on that latent connection that they already have with their characters, and hopefully that will transmit to the audience, Kyle.
So you just hit the nail on the head for me, Dan, when you said Chris Chibnall cannot build his own characters. I'm going to go right to the Doctor. I'm going right to Jodie. Jodie Whittaker never got to be a doctor because Chris Chibnall had no idea how to build a doctor. And so she had no direction. And it just, I think it goes back to something I've felt for a long time with this. Jodie Whittaker was hired coming off of a popularity of Attack the Block in the United States and her popularity in Broadchurch, plus her connection with Chris Chibnall. Chris Chibnall brought Jodie Whittaker in because he could puppet her. And what you saw, and even that brief image moment where we see all the other old doctors and their confidence in the doctors they have, and we still see Jodie struggling to find her own doctor. Chris Chibnall cannot build a companion. The only reason why Graham was so successful is because the actor is just absolutely brilliant. Same thing with Dan. John Bishop created Dan. There was no Chibnall in there. John Bishop made Dan at least watchable.
He brought that persona, his own being, his own energy, just as Bradley Walsh had before.
And so the problem is this, is that I will always say for this era, Chibnall was the majority of the problem. Jodie's case is, I like Jodie. She's handled some things poorly. I'm not going to even argue that point, but Jodie is not a good enough actress to build her own character. She needs direction, she needs proper writing, and she never got that with this Doctor. So I think this episode, again, I go back to this episode, just shows all the problems wrapped up in once. It makes no sense. Things are coming out of left field from all over the place. They're just throwing characters around. The reason people watched this episode was they got the throwbacks that they wanted from Classic Who and for the regeneration. And that was it. The story had no matter to people at all. They rode the ride to see the familiar faces, to see the end of the Chibnall and Jodie era, and to see the return of David Tennant.
And it was all so loud, and they did, and Chris Chibnall did incorporate things which had kind of marked his era out as, I won't say unique, but it certainly marked his era out. Ashad, the Lone Side Man, being one of the very few examples of a character that people will point out and at least say, I remember that guy. But there's been so little else that reaching for people like Ace and Tegan, and I'm not going to be churlish about that. I love Janet Fielding, I love Sophie Aldred, I love Ace, and I love Tegan. It was guaranteed to get my attention right away. But in many ways, Charlotte, I do feel that this was an exercise in distraction, and that he was using that emotional response from such as myself and the loyalty to the fan base and the characters for those two ladies in particular to carry his really as thin as ever story through that additional runtime.
Yeah, and the scenes which were the best, I would say, writing and performance was by far Sophie having that moment with her doctor and to get that closure. And it was really well done with her and Sylvester when he sort of says, oh, I sort of let you go because I knew you were ready. That was quite a lovely little scene.
Proper
And then with
character beats, character development.
And then with Tegan, when she sort of said to Davidson, her doctor, why did you leave me? And he was like, oh, Braveheart, like you didn't need me. And I was almost amazed by those two scenes because I was like, that's a doctor and companion relationship, even if it's only a tiny like glimmer. So I don't know what Chris has been doing because in those scenes, he seemed to actually understand what a doctor and companion are like and how important that relationship is, and sort of what impressed me also with the classic Doctors, when we saw obviously the when they were all like in whatever that zone was when they were flipping in between the faces, even for that little glimpse when we got McKeon for a couple of minutes, we got the first Doctor for a couple of minutes, even then they felt like they're doctors. So that was even more confusing when I was like, you've written all the classic Doctors quite well, but Jodie, you've done this horrible job of doing her Doctor. So that just almost confused me a bit, if I'm being honest.
I think he can write them reasonably well because he grew up watching them, and they exist in his head. It's a character that he hasn't built; it's been built for him. And obviously, this man, he has been working in television for decades. He is a writer. And so maybe that's all he can really do, work on characters built by other people. I mean, I noticed, Kyle, and we've spoken about this several times throughout, not just Flux, but Series 12 in particular, and there was a little of this in Series 11, how at every junction that he gets, Chris Chibnall, in his script, will shunt the Doctor, Jodie Whittaker, not just away from her companions, but sometimes away from any human contact at all. So she's locked in some sort of void somewhere, or talking to a bunch of complete strangers, or roaming around in the middle of nowhere with nobody to talk to. Here he banishes her and brings in a succession of other actors and characters to actually lead the show bit by bit by bit, including those past Doctors. So we're supposed to believe that Ace and Tegan can see that they're talking to the current Doctor, but they're seeing the Doctor from their past through some sort of MacGuffin. It's never really explained. It's never clarified. But realistically, if you've got any faith in Jodie Whittaker as an actress, I don't believe that's just there for the fans. But he needn't have hired Sylvester and Peter for those scenes. If he'd have got the faith in his actress to work those moments, that should have been Jodie opposite Sophie, selling us on the fact they were the same person.
No, here's what I think. And I want to say this. I want to see what Chris thinks on this too, because my feeling is this. One, the old Doctors were mandated by BBC, and I think for ratings purposes. And I also think, and I would not be surprised if somewhere down the road we find out that at some point Russell T Davies got his hands on this script, because there were some elements of this that felt from Russell on this script that felt like Russell moments to me more than they did Chibnall writing. Just how like bringing people together, using those classic things, because this is things Chibnall did not do. And I just feel like that there's some mandated outside influence here, Dan. I think he just lifted stuff that both Russell and Stephen had already done successfully. He could see the framework of that, the way that writers can. What do you think about that, Chris?
Well, I agree with you, Kyle. At this time we can't say exactly, and we may never know. If I am going off of what I have heard from some of my friends, and this is all rumor, but going off of what I've heard from my friends, I think you've all heard the same rumors, that it's very possible that Chris Chibnall was fired during Series 12. And then because of the reaction once the BBC saw what he was bringing to them. And he hadn't brought to them great, explosive, wonderful stuff during Series 11. It almost feels as if this era has been, how do we say this? It feels like this era has been unwelcome in its own time. And for about at least half of its era, probably more. So that by the time you get to Series 13, which from what I understand was reduced by the BBC even before COVID came along, because they had to complete Chibnall's contract.
That's right.
It sounds from what I have heard that certainly by the time of the writing of Power of the Doctor, that Chris Chibnall has been pretty much pushed out. And so when you have a situation where your head writer, the man who should be running the show, who should be the captain of your ship, is gone, not by his own desire, like, oh, I can't do this, but you're no longer welcome. I can't imagine that the person writing the script has his heart in it. I can't imagine that the person writing the script is excited for what comes next, because he's probably even going to be allowed to see the next episodes. It's a little bit like, although I really loathe to make this comparison, it's a little bit like the history of Orson Welles in cinema. Orson Welles famously was, you could argue, a great genius and did a lot of wonderful things, but he was always being cut out of his own films. He was always being shut out of his own story. And I think that for much better reasons, this is what has happened to Chris Chibnall. He's been cut out of his own story, cut out. You talked about a party, right? It's a party in his honor, and he was disinvited. You just can't come. And so I imagine, I'm sure that there are a lot of other people's fingerprints on this story.
The script, we can't speak for the script. Obviously, Russell T Davies, he would have been just entering the frame at around the time that the script was delivered. This was an extra commission from Charlotte Moore well after the fact. So initially there was the block of, we believe, 10 that was whittled down to 8. Legend of the Sea Devils and Eve of the Daleks. Eve of the Daleks was written like in 5 days or something like that. I think Legend of the Sea Devils was originally going to be the conclusion to the whole era, and this was just something that he seemed to have to come up with to order, really, because the BBC needed it for the centenary. They needed something of a marker. And as I understand it, this was always a sort of a separate thing, a separate entity. It's fallen to the past showrunners to actually promote this for Chris Chibnall, because, I mean, allegedly there is a lot of acrimony there. I think if you look at Chris Chibnall at the premiere, you can see he's not comfortable there. The things that he's done very little promotion since. It's fallen to Russell T Davies, who said this: it's like a 10-year-old's fantasy version of Doctor Who, but with muscle and punch and light and colour. That was Russell bigging up this special just a short time ago. I think it was about 4 or 5 months ago, something like that. And Stephen Moffat has also been very supportive of it too, trying to polish that turd. And whilst Chris Chibnall himself, he shows his face when he absolutely has to. I mean, I look at the story itself and what's on screen, and what I see, Kyle, is quite a thin, quite a familiar story that is just told at breakneck speed, intercut with lots of other stuff to distract you from the main story, either because they haven't got enough confidence in it or just to pad out the runtime. That just makes a lot of noise. Doesn't really, stylistically, it's all over the place. I've likened this, I think it was on our Legend of the Sea Devils show, I said that Chris Chibnall, his relationship to Doctor Who, he views it similarly to the old Adam West Batman show. And I got that even more with this. I don't know if it was deliberately camp and nonsensical, and even I don't want to say meta, because I think that makes it to be more, but it was more, I think this was more pantomime than Doctor Who has ever been, ever. So
going with Chris, what he says about Chibnall, when I think about it now, there's a feeling of a bit of a ring of truth to this, that Chibnall may have been credited for it, but he didn't really write a lot of this. And because I think about a couple of aspects in this. This story is so all over the map. I'm gonna be honest with you. To me, it felt like the Star Wars sequels, because it felt like you had different creators, and the right hand wasn't talking to the left hand, and then they just brought all these pieces together and kind of puzzled them in. Also, the aspect of the fact that Chibnall's big thing was the Joe Martin, everything, the Timeless Children. That was going to be his big thing, and that has just been so thrown out to the wayside. Yes, you get the Joe Martin appearance, which I think they did try to do a little, which makes sense. They try to do a couple little things to the Chibnall air so people make it feel like it is coming from Chibnall. It's a legitimate question.
Something. I mean, Joe Martin's fugitive doctor, we're supposed to believe, and this character was literally farted into existence over a lunchtime when Vinay Patel and Chris Chibnall were working on Fugitive of the Jadoon, they put no thought into it whatsoever. I don't know if they realised it was going to be as popular as it was, or that this actress would grow a little bit of a fan base. But it's reduced in this to little more than a meme. And I do feel that now, and certainly as time goes on, that this Doctor will be reduced to effectively a meme, which is terribly unfair on Joe Martin, and all joking apart, unfair on the people whose imaginations were sparked by that character, Kyle.
Because in one episode, she brought more fascination and interest as the Doctor than Jodie Whittaker did her entire run as the Doctor. But the other aspect, the fact that the Timeless Children was just basically forgot about. I was actually shocked to see Sasha back as the Master, and that again, that storyline made absolutely no sense.
There's two masters in different time zones. The schemes with paintings that don't actually go anywhere. That mean nothing. They're just visual. They're just visual gags. It's a confection, nothing more. But when you get to the heart of the story, Charlotte, I don't know if you noticed this, but I mean, at first I was delighted to see Jodie Whittaker forced into this booth with the Master in an opposing booth for this big body swap to take place, and that was the crux of the story, really, wasn't it? That the Master wanted to take over the Doctor's body so that they will live and she will die, which is the exact plot of the TV movie, really, when you boil it down. So Chris has got characters built by other people that came before. He's got a plot that Matthew Jacobs created back in 1995/96 for the TV movie. Everything else going on around it is just noise and light and colour that Russell describes there. It's almost like a conjuring trick, really. As if I make a lot of noise and bang enough doors, will it still be ringing in people's ears by the time they realise that I've already gone? Just as Chris said.
Yeah, no, this really rang to me of originally. I think this would have been the conclusion of the whole Timeless Child, of Joe Martin, but I think BBC told him no. It's not gone down well.
I believe that all that was snuffed out well before this was written. I don't think that was ever in the equation for this, because the entire thing is so detached from it. But
I'm thinking more when Chris had probably when he first started to do any sort of thought towards this whole storyline. He was probably so we had to dash then and be like, okay, so I can't do what I wanted to, so I'll grab this, and like you said, the Master. Even the Master, which should have been the centre point story-wise, didn't really become centre point story-wise. He sort of took over a big part of the middle bit, and then he disappeared off screen for like the end bit, and then came back near the end because he had to be the one to make her regenerate. But I've got to say, though, I've been very harsh on Sasha because I liked him in his first episode, and then I really didn't like what he was doing, or I don't know if he was being told to act a certain way, or he just naturally was acting this sort of crazy, everywhere sort of silly voices, almost like a child who had too many sweets. That's how I honestly would describe him. But in this episode, it was like a 360 for me. He completely toned it down. He was a lot more sort of quiet and menacing. He was a lot more clever, as I think he's ever been shown, really. And it worked. And I'm just thinking, why couldn't Sasha be like this for the majority of his run? Why are we getting this now?
He was back to being the quieter, the contained character that we saw in Spyfall Part 1. Sacha Dhawan, in my view, Kyle, is a fantastic actor.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'd have loved to have seen him play the Doctor. Having him as the Master has been the next best thing. I thought if it wasn't for him, there would have been so little on screen. I think that Sacha Dhawan and Sophie Aldred were what made this for me, but particularly him, because he played several different versions of the same character. He had to show the Master in various states, in various psychological states. What do you think? I mean, because obviously the Daleks and the Cybermen, they might as well not be here realistically. It's just window dressing. Without Sasha, this episode wouldn't have worked at all, would it?
No, and Sasha's probably one of the few high points of this era. And to address what Charlotte says, it goes back to what I said. I think the craziness of the Master in the later episodes after his first appearance, that's Chibnall. That's their showrunner and your creators directing these actors instead of letting these actors do what they do best. And I think that's another thing with that's going to come across with the Chibnall era, is that we're going to find out that these actors weren't allowed to have as much input as previous actors had with Moffat and with Russell to help build and develop these characters. And I think Sacha Darwin, he is phenomenal. I love him, and I think he next to John Sim, he might be my favorite iteration of the Master.
I think that when I look back now, as of recording, this premiered just over a week ago, and so little of it has really stuck with me. And there are certain moments which I did relish. We'll come to those in a little while. But the thing that actually did stick in my head, I hate to say this, is it involved Sacha Dhawan, and it was the Ra Ra Rasputin dance routine there with the old Boney M track playing in the background. I still can't get this tune out of my head. I say it's been over a week now, and I think it was partly down to the fact that it was always a great song, but due to how he performed it, it felt like a Doctor Who moment. It felt I don't know, it just felt like it was a high point in the era, and yet it didn't involve Jodie Whittaker or the Doctor at all.
Yeah, well, that's typical Chibnall. It's frustrating because I look at certain things and there's potential there, and this story had some really great elements to it that just didn't get fleshed out. And then there's Yaz.
So as always, Mandip Gill was back as Yasmin Khan, the longest standing new series companion, Kyle. Yet again, though, I did see her act a couple of times in this, but she was separate from the Doctor a great deal of the time, wasn't she? She didn't really have much chemistry with anybody else, so it still didn't feel like much.
No, I'm curious on Chris's take on this too, because it really felt like the stars of this run of Doctor Who were put into the background of their own show for other people. The Sasha steals a lot of it. All of the seeing the past Doctors and past characters. The actual people who were the ones who I guess you can say define this era of Doctor Who were so pushed to the background that they didn't even feel like they were a massive part of it.
Well, if you're asking for my opinion about Yaz, while watching this episode and seeing her incredible suddenly innate abilities at piloting the TARDIS, I reminded of River Song. I have a lot of issues with River Song. I feel that she is an overpowered Mary Sue. If I could sum up my feelings of Yaz, I think that she's a powerless Mary Sue. Yaz is a character that if you were to see her from the beginning of her era in the Chibnall times, what was that? The Woman Who Fell to Earth, and then compare her to the power of the Doctor, while along the way hyping her to the viewer as the longest-serving Doctor Who companion and the Doctor's soulmate, and as Graham said, the greatest living person who has ever existed. I wouldn't be able to find. And you told me, and this is this is her. But you've never seen a photo of her. You're given all the information, but you're saying, now which one do you think she is? I wouldn't be able to tell. I would say, I don't think she exists, because she doesn't exist. She's a character who's simply there. She's a background character in her own family story in Demons in the Punjab. She's you could easily create the wonderful, what's that? I don't know the name of the tune, but Curb Your Enthusiasm. There's a series called Curb Your Enthusiasm, which uses this funny little music that's often used as kind of a, oh, shame on you, you don't know what you're talking about. You could sum up, you could do a wonderful meme of when Yaz in Prisoner of the Judoon is setting herself up to be, I can be a policewoman, I can tell these Judoon what to do. And then she's whisked away and taken away by Jack, and that could be the music. That's the story of her life. Is nothing. It's a story of, it's an empty chamber of a character that you're meant to think is the best that's ever existed. It's at the least annoying, and at the most it's infuriating for me, because I don't like being told what to think in a story. I don't like being told this is the most amazing person. She's hype. She's empty hype and nothing more. I think that Yaz is a failure. I
always say that Doctor Who, be it a season of Doctor Who or a good story of Doctor Who, is always or should be to possess that Doctor Who magic. It needs to be more than the sum of its parts. So we've got characters, we've got story. Every story's got that. Everything we see on TV or at the movies has got those things. But for something to succeed as Doctor Who, it's got to be soaked in something else, in some of this magic, Charlotte. And I did feel that with this, whether it was the presence of the old faces, whether it was just a want to deliver something that could be memorable, being aware that this was going to be the one that people were going to go back to, I do feel that they were trying to give us a good time. And I don't want to be the guy who says he didn't enjoy this, because whilst I did look at my clock a couple of times, I did appreciate certain parts of it. It did feel like they were trying to entertain me, trying to amuse me, trying to remind me of things I used to love, and to win back some of the fan base that they'd lost. So I'm trying to be generous with this, because I think that the heart was in the right place, even if it hadn't got there naturally. It's sort of been shunted back there because they needed us for this to go out on some sort of high note. So I'm trying not to be too hard on it. But obviously, with the passage of time, you realise that so little of it makes sense. So much of it needn't have been there. Like poor Vinda, played again by Jacob Anderson. It was little more than a spit and a cough. I mean, did you, for all that we've said about it, because again, we've gone in on this episode, did you enjoy it in any way?
Not as a whole episode, because, like you said, Jodie, people know my feelings on Jodie's Doctor, but this didn't feel like a big farewell to her Doctor in the slightest, and that was a shame, because it should have felt like that. It's her final one. I have a big issue anyway when characters don't have nonsensical reasons for things, and this was just terrible for that.
So and you see, this is more of a time for them to have seized the day.
Yes.
To take those, just as Kyle said, rather than pushing those characters to the background, thinking, okay, this hasn't been as successful as it should have been, as it could have been. We've got these two women in these two roles. This is the very last chance they're going to have to play them in context. Let's go all or nothing. Let's put some conviction into this, and that they ultimately didn't. Even
sort of their parting, like reflecting back on that was incredibly cold, and like it didn't feel like two good friends, because that's how I see them, even though I don't think that's been done brilliantly, but that's sort of how I see their relationship. It didn't even feel like two good friends saying goodbye, because sort of she gets hit by the beam, by the giant jellyfish thing. Yaz carries her into the TARDIS, and then Jodie just sort of, once she realises she's regenerating, says, I want to be by myself. And that, I don't understand that motivation for Jodie's Doctor, because this Doctor has shown in the past she doesn't like being by herself. She likes having having people around her. So I don't understand why suddenly she sort of says a very tepid goodbye to Yaz, and then sort of banishes her from the TARDIS. And I just was like, why would, like, if it was other Doctors, maybe I could buy it, because they either want a bit more privacy when they regenerate, or it would be too painful for them to do it in front of a companion they're quite close to. But with Jodie, it just felt like, are you doing this once again because in the script you need her to be by herself?
But it's like that all the way through, though, isn't it? That lack of connectivity. You know, I was thinking, we see Sophie back as Ace, we see Janet back as Tegan. They introduced both of those characters talking to one another. Then they bring them into Unit HQ. You think, okay, this is the moment where they're going to meet the Doctor. This is going to give me the chills. This is going to give me the same sort of chills that I got when the 10th Doctor first met Sarah Jane again. And there's been other moments like that. And yet it just didn't come. And it wasn't just the meetings that were like that were all, almost played down, but it was all the departures. Well, everything was wrapped up in a similar way. So with the Doctor is mortally wounded, and people are sort of huddled around her extended fam. But that's the last that we see of them together. There's nothing touching there. There's no killer line that sort of tugs at your heartstrings. There's no raising of stakes. There's no this is the moment about it. There's no big gambit. It's all or nothing. It's all just stuff that's happening.
Yeah, and even when they do that scene on top of the TARDIS, which I was like, okay, maybe this is going to be the proper goodbye between them. Jodie's Doctor just says, "Oh, I loved traveling with you." I'm sorry, that's such a boring line to have as your final sort of interaction. It should have been more like that whole scene for me. And like I said, that's the end then. Yaz is sort of meets John and Bradley to have the meeting at the end. And I was just like, God, like, I need to feel something for these two departing, and there's nothing.
I've got a quote here from Jodie Whittaker herself, Kyle, and she said about this during the promo. She didn't give that many interviews either. She spoke to Carol Vorderman on BBC Radio Wales. There was a couple of really scant appearances on things here and there. But she said about the power of the Doctor, it's one for the Whovians. It's a treat if you're a proper fan. It all sounds very gatekeeperish, isn't it? It's got all the iconic things you associate with Doctor Who. It's massive. That's exactly the kind of things that she was not saying consistently over the last 3 or 4 years. Was she right? Was this one for the Whovians? Should we all lighten up a little bit? Because, hey, there's Daleks, there's Cybermen, there's past Doctors. What more do you want?
Okay, so here's my feeling on this. I think, and actually in that statement, in her mind and in her heart, I think it was in the right place because of all the old classic elements of Doctor Who. And I think Jodie truly, I think deep down, and she can't talk about it yet. And I think whether it's a year from now, 2 years from now, at some point, there's going to be a lot of truths to come out about this era of Doctor Who. I really, truly do think that Jodie, in the end, realized this was not the Doctor Who the fans wanted, but there was nothing at that point. The ship had sailed. There was nothing that could be done about it. And I think that's why you hear her talk about wanting to hopefully get a chance to someday to come back to Who, because I'm starting to think that Jodie even now realizes she didn't get to be the Doctor Who she wanted to be. And I think, again, it comes back to, I think too, as far as like why it felt very low key for the current crew, is I think, again, I come back, I think maybe even the BBC, we don't want this group to have any memorable moments. We just want to be over it and move forward. And I think that's the attitude that was taken by the BBC and some mandates they probably had down to people who were working on this. And even Chibnall himself, if he wrote this episode, was just like, I just want to be done with it. Let's just move past this part of my life. It went bad. Let's do that. Unfortunately, like I said, I think for classic Who fans, there's some great moments in this. And the point of them doing that was just like, hey, we haven't forgot you. We remember you. We love you. We're going to get back to on track and get back to you classic Who fans. And I mean, Paul McGann, in his brief moments, there's part of me that almost wishes it was Jodie would have regenerated into Paul McGann, so Paul McGann could have really gotten his fair shot to really stretch his Doctor legs a little more. But I also know why we got David Tennant, and there's a lot of marketing reasons why, and there's a lot of reasons of saving the franchise why. And I think if Doctor Who had been on better ground at the end of this thing, they might have taken that chance with Paul McGann if that was the way the storyline was going to go. But it is what it is, and we are where we are now. And I think it's time for everybody to just kind of take that breath and say, okay, what's next, and move on, because there's nothing from this era that's memorable. There's nothing from this era, but that stands out in this. Well,
there's nothing from this era that's memorable that is of its own gift. Everything is moments like the moments where the 13th Doctor. See, I have to struggle to even call her that. It's Jodie. And I don't feel that she believes that she's the Doctor. So why should I believe that she's the Doctor? When she stood opposite the other Doctors in that cavern in the domain that exists between the world and passing into regeneration, it's kind of, they're effectively like standing at the pearly gates, aren't they? In Christianity, it's like they're the guardians up to heaven almost. And this is another reason why I see this as a soft retcon of the entire timeless child thing, because when she gets to those gates, in Christianity, it's St. Peter is at the gates, isn't it? Here, it is the first Doctor, as originated by William Hartnell, not Joe Martin's Doctor or anybody else not some child. It's the Doctor, and this is their way. They haven't got the time, the energy, or the resources to retcon something that they put on screen that nobody liked in the first place and very few people actually watched. So the way I view this is a way of them reaffirming the real continuity. But when I see Jodie Whittaker opposite those four men in particular, Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy, Paul McGann and Peter Davison, and to some extent David Bradley, who I think, even though he's only played the character twice, plays it with the kind of weight that I think Hartnell would have been proud. Opposite those actors, it's very clear that she knows by this point that she's not the Doctor, that these men are this character, and it's game over from this point. I mean, I'm very conscious of the fact that this review is again sounding like an autopsy, and I don't mean it to, because here at least I don't feel like they were trying to pull the wool over. I don't think that they were trying to pull the wool over our eyes. I think they were exposed. They knew they were exposed. They had one last hurrah, and I do think that they wanted to give us something to entertain us on their way out the door. But unfortunately, it's far too little, too late. Chris, did this charm you? Any of these old faces? Did this make up for 4 years of mediocrity on screen?
Not in the slightest. Because you mentioned and you said this before in an earlier podcast you've done, and well done to that earlier one. You mentioned autopsy, right? Well, how can you become excited on something that's dead on departure? And seeing these old faces, it's the same feeling I had. And you know me, Dan, and you can see by my avatar, you can understand why that I'm a massive Brigadier fan. You would expect hearing Nicholas Courtney's voice in The Survivors of the Flux, or seeing Kate Stewart in these episodes. And I admit Kate Stewart had a better outing here than she did in Flux. Yeah. But it's hard to. I would have expected, some excitement on my part hearing Nicholas Courtney's voice, or hearing a little reference to your dad was an idiot or such, just little references to him. But it's all empty now. I mean, you see photos. I'll liken it this way. You see photos. Compare how UNIT looks now in the post-Brigadier era to how Moffat was showing it when you had, Death in Heaven, when the 12th Doctor's on the UNIT plane, and there's a photo of the Brigadier, and the set's the right size, even though there aren't many people there. It's a room. But the way it's lit, it's warm. There's that sense of, yes, there are familiar ghosts around us. Well, think of UNIT now, a relatively large building with white walls, pretty much empty rooms, one person on the side of the hall, maybe in the hallway. No, not even sounds of any computers moving. It's just empty. Seeing these other Doctors, it's nice, and I appreciate it. What would have got me excited, because it's all just empty ghosts. We don't even get to see this photo here. That's Peter Davison. Well, it's not Peter Davison. It's an AI representation of Jodie Whittaker that happens to look like Peter Davison. And it's nice. He says Braveheart. There's a little interaction. I think the Sophie and Sylvester McCoy exchange was a little better. But
see, Chris, this is my Doctor. Peter Davison was my Doctor. Tegan was my favourite companion.
Yeah.
Him saying Braveheart to her should have been the moment that made me gasp, made me feel 9 years old again. But I didn't feel a thing.
Well, there's nothing left to feel, because we know that this is the end of an era. We know that Peter Davison is not. Peter Davison, the Fifth Doctor, is not going to appear on screen in the flesh and run around with her. Now, had that happened, had any of these. They have Colin Baker, they have Paul McGann, they have Peter Davis, and they have Sylvester McCoy. I understand that some of them might. I've heard that Paul McGann filmed his stuff on a different day, so maybe he couldn't have shown up. But you have Peter Davison on the set. You have him there. You know that he was filming it right there. And yet it's just a wisp of a ghost. Look, there's nothing left in this era, in this series, in this iteration of Doctor Who, that can, I think, get us excited. Partly because it's after the fact. This is an autopsy. There's unless you are a medical doctor that has an eerie bent, there's nothing to be excited about. It's all clinical. This is a clinical description of a failure of a program that's nearly 60 years. Because at the heart of it, its main character has failed, its main companion has failed, its showrunner has failed. Look, this really is like a wake or a funeral, because all it is just of echoes. It's all it is remembrances of better times that have passed already, and of earlier times that we once enjoyed. We may enjoy them again one day, but in this era, in this context, this is emptiness, and that's what I felt going away from. It
reminded me of 29 years ago. I sat down on Jordan and Need night with my 3D glasses on to watch a little thing called Dimensions in Time. And that was similarly very, very noisy, lots of running around, jumping from place to place, people reappearing and disappearing for no reason at all. A lot of these actors were there present. And of course, it was absolute nonsense. And it is, for the most part, it's kind of softly reviled by a lot of the fandom all this time on. But the saving grace for that, Charlotte, was it was done for charity. This looks like it cost a few quid. You know, the budget looked significantly higher and the production values were better than Legend of the Sea Devils, because that was piss poor, wasn't it? This did look a little better.
Oh yeah, you could definitely see BBC put more money into this with some of the explosions, like the building. Was it Unit HQ that exploded? That looked quite good. And the planet where the giant jellyfish thing was, that looked quite good. But just to add to what you were saying about why maybe the classic stuff didn't work for some people, I think it's because we know this isn't coming from any proper sincere notion, because this era, when it started, was so keen on pushing out the old. It was so loud and proud almost of, we're here now, we're going to do it our way, we're going to get our fans. So you can't start like that and be that abrasive and then expect your fan base to suddenly believe that you do honestly want to have the classic stuff back. Because we know why you've got the classic stuff back. It's because either the BBC told you to, or Chris realised, if it's full of my characters and my plot lines, nobody's going to care. People will care if I put the classic stuff in. So I think because Russell was brilliant at his era of having the reference here and bringing back this for an episode or having a bit of fun. But it felt like he was doing it because he genuinely wanted to bring that character back. I can remember when he brought Unit back, and it felt like he was just doing it because he adored what it represented in the first run. And
I think the word that, when I think about Russell and those characters, how he handled them was with relish.
Yes, and like Sarah Jane, that whole episode when you could just tell he wanted to reintroduce her to people my age who might not know her, and he wanted us to fall in love again. Same with Moffat. That's what I also think Kate's always been. It's been his tribute to the Brig. But with Chris, you don't get that feeling at all. You just get, this is a desperate man who's just trying to reach for anything that can work. So I just think it's a shame, because I would have loved to have seen the classic Doctors back in a different era. And I'm very thankful that we've got a 60th coming up. Because I
any
think
episode but this, any other writer than this, any other circumstances but this. Kyle, is it the simple truth that, you know, we were given 90 minutes for this? This is the longest Doctor Who special, I think, since the 5 Doctors, all the way back in 1983. So it's had this increased runtime, but is the irony of it that for the most of this episode, the majority of the people who watched it, whether they were there from minute 1 or join, say, halfway through or 10 minutes before the end, they were there for only one reason. And it was to see this character, or this version of this character, meet their end. Was that really the price of worth the price of admission for most?
Well, first of all, is if you watch this live in the U.S. on BBC America, it wasn't 90 minutes. It had a half an hour of commercials in it to extend it to 2 hours.
Poor man. I'm so sorry.
I know Chris feels my pain here, but yes, I think ultimately what this special comes down to is people wanted to see the end of this Doctor. And I think I'm going to say this, and to me, it was one of the actually good parts of this episode was I honestly thought not the speech, but the actual regeneration itself, the visuals of this regeneration were actually one of the best regenerations we've seen in a very long time.
Got you surprised? I completely disagree, but
yeah, no, I will say this: I was definitely getting a Highlander feel from it as well. The Doctor did have a quickening, but I just think the visuals of having Jodie just morph right into Tennant, clothes and everything, and the overlook that to me that's an awesome looking shot right there. I'm specifically talking about the cinematography and the effect of it. And I think that it needed to be kind of this big showy thing, because I really think that the point of this was to just they're pulling on Chibnall what Chibnall tried to pull on Doctor Who, what Charlotte talked about. Chibnall, they came in loud and abrasive and said, we're ignoring the past. This is the new era of Doctor Who. This is the new direction of Doctor Who. Forget the past. And Chibnall tried to do everything he could to change the past of Doctor Who, to make it irrelevant. And he couldn't, and it backfired on him. And so to have this very loud and drastic change and regeneration into the 14th Doctor, I think that it's a little bit of a shot at the air too. Like this air tried to start out spectacular, but we're going to close it out spectacularly as far as that moment goes. But we're not going to give it anything memorable, so people can go that makes people want to go back and revisit this era.
I got to be honest, I find it personally quite bland. I think that as much as I've enjoyed Sasha in this, yet again, it's the Master that brings about this Doctor's end. We've seen that multiple times before, and it's by the time that the regeneration actually started, it was a sense of sort of at last. I was so sort of worn down after 90 minutes of this. Like I couldn't wait for it to be over anyway. But it was more a case of a big release. There's only so much power that any of us can take, and there's only so many plot holes and so much stuff and nonsense, isn't it, that we can all try and sort of work our way back through to plot and to process and to chew over. So I think it's time that we took a couple of minutes to take in something a little more substantial and thoroughly absorbent, courtesy of our friends across the Fandom Podcast Network, a whole collective of conversationalists channeling a multitude of topics. There you go, try saying that when you're drunk. Kev's here to tell you a little bit more about all of that. Then you can meet Charlotte, Kyle, and I guess Chris straight back here for more in a couple of minutes. Speak to you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blooded Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our fandom flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast. We cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. The True Believers MCU podcast discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. Union Federation, our Star Trek and the Orville Show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
Yes, we've teased and tantalized you there, and we can even clothe you too. There's merch to match all of those shows, including Type 40. If you head over to teepublic.com, search for the Fandom Podcast Network, and you'll quickly find a store full of all the team colours for all of the podcasts, on everything from T-shirts to phone cases, all the way to those enormous tapestries. You can treat yourself, treat your other selves, and it all goes to support the Fandom Podcast Network into the bargain. So everybody wins. Yes, she may be gone, but we're right here. We're back at Type 40 to talk about the power of the Doctor, the conclusion to the power of the Doctor, and that latest regeneration of the title character there, recently played by Jodie Whittaker, of course, and in the latest in that long line. And for a time, I think a lot of us suspected that it could have easily have been the last. We talked a little bit about the regeneration there, Carl. You say you're a fan. I don't think it was badly made, this transition. I don't think it was necessarily. I don't think it was ill-conceived. I like the fact that it wasn't set in the TARDIS again, because we've had that time after time after time after time. But I think, is it just the fact that I never felt this character throughout the last 4 years, so I couldn't possibly be affected by any aspect of her demise?
I think, Dan, for me, the reason why I liked it was the excitement it brings seeing David Tennant back.
Yeah,
and I think that regeneration, it's about what it leads to. It's not about what it's leaving behind. It's about what it's leading to, and it's leading to that sense of hope for a lot of Doctor Who fans.
Renewal.
Renewal.
This was the first time in the history of the show where we haven't been 100% certain who was going to be stood there in Whittaker's place. I mean, it was only down to two candidates, David Tennant or Ncuti Gatwa. That at least was something new. But did you always know that it would be Tennant stood there?
I think we knew it was going to be Tennant, because I just think that this comes down to a couple of things. The BBC and Russell both knew we have to get this right. We've got to get the fan base back. But not only that, it's not just about getting the fan base back that's in the UK. It's getting back the worldwide fan base that Doctor Who has lost because from this era.
Because 10 years ago, it was really getting somewhere, wasn't it, when Matt Smith was the Doctor in particular?
Even up until the time when Jodie was announced as the Doctor and appeared at San Diego Comic-Con, Doctor Who was riding a high. Yes, it had dropped off a little after the transition from Matt Smith to Peter Capaldi, but it was still being talked about across the world. The Jodie era started and went the direction it went. The world changed. Let's be honest. The world changed over that time too, drastically. To bring back David Tennant, to have him be the next Doctor we see on the screen, to have him officially be the 14th Doctor, which is something I actually really like that they're doing. They're handling it brilliantly. And one of the things I like about this in all these images too, is we see where it looks like David is also taking our next Doctor kind of under his wing and helping him understand what the Doctor is too. We've seen them a lot together in photos. We've seen them we know they've had conversations. We know Russell's been kind of directing traffic between them.
I've not seen any photos of the two of them together yet, but I do think we are in a situation where there are kind of two leads to this show. We've seen Ncuti Gatwa already begin to act as an ambassador for the show in New York this week, within 48 hours of this scene airing, and he wasn't even in it. He was out there promoting the show. So I do appreciate what you're saying, and it does feel like there's a passing of the baton here, which under normal circumstances would have been between the recently departed Doctor, the most recently in the continuity, and the guy about to take the show forward. But here, clearly, they've just got no confidence in the actress.
I honestly do believe if they would have regenerated from Jodie to Ncuti would not stand a chance, because I think you have to heal, and I think only two doctors right now. I'll go three. It either had to be David, Matt Smith. I think they could have gotten away with Paul McGann, because I know there's a lot of the fan base who would like to see him get a chance to stretch his legs more to the Doctor. Yeah. But I think it really had to either be David or Matt Smith. We knew Matt Smith has very big current commitments right now.
Yes.
And having David, and I think you have to have it be David through these specials, because I just think the fan base needs to be reestablished and says, yes, we know who the Doctor is. We know what Doctor Who is, and we're bringing Doctor Who back to what you know it to be. And I think I think that's incorporating classic Who. It's bringing back elements that Chris Chibnall removed, and it's also bringing back somebody who knows the Doctor, can reestablish the Doctor, and yet reestablish the Doctor with the changes that have been made, incorporating the 11th, 12th, and 13th aspects of the Doctor that are now part of the 14th Doctor. With that said, I think it's about marketing, and it's about getting people back, and that's where we're at right now. And
cold hard truth.
That's why we have David Tennant on our screen at the end of this episode.
Chris, all it's taken is 30 episodes to run a pretty damn healthy show right into the ground here. I mean, never has so little content been put out by so many, by a well-staffed production team to so few. Ratings absolutely plummeted. It was the steepest decline in the series' long history, from that initial interest at the beginning, at the woman who fell to earth, which really spiked, to an all-time low. Never mind the new series, the classic series in the equation too. That all-time low for Legend of the Sea Devils had fewer people watching than ever, both overnight and consolidated. So in reinstalling David Tennant in this role, for however long, even if it was for 3 minutes, never mind 3 episodes, is this, just as Kyle said, blatantly and a massive rescue operation on the entire intellectual property before they can move it forward?
Well, this will sound flippant. Is this a trick question? Yes, it is.
Some people call me a sexist and all these other things for even suggesting that. So I know that sounds like a stupid question, but you'd be amazed the amount of people who find that question offensive.
Well, no one wants to admit failure. No one wants to. Okay, look, I mentioned. I'm going to plug that you mentioned Times Champion, and I mentioned that it felt like they'd taken something from Times Champion. Of course, I'm half joking, but there is a line that Valeyard says in that book that I'm happy to say that I wrote to the Sixth Doctor, when the Doctor pleads with the Valeyard to say, why continue down this road? And the Valeyard says, I could never live as a failure. And no one can. It's human nature. So even now, after these last 4 years or 5 years or such, the BBC is never going to publicly say, yes, we failed, or yes, this was a mistake, or yes, this was a misstep. You always save face. And so this will be marketed as a celebration, as the 60th anniversary. This will be marketed as a sense of fun and adventure. This will be marketed as the next step in the evolution of the Doctor, when in fact what it really is, the cold hard truth, is that it is a resuscitation. This is a resuscitation move. The series is dead. It's dead on departure, and it's really, let's be honest, it's dead on arrival right now. However, the best way to bring it back is this wonderful jolt to the system. It's I'm happy to see David Tennant back, but I will be also frank. There's a book called North and South, and it was made into a BBC, I think, series some years ago, starring Richard Armitage. And it's a nice story, but there is a nice little scene where the leading female protagonist goes back to her home, and she has loving memories of home. But when and the way it's shown on the screen is that there's this nice little glowing haze on the screen when she has memories. When she goes back to her home is run down, her parents are dead, the house is in disarray and such. You can't go back. This is going to be an interesting exercise, seeing what RTD does, because he really is putting the rose-colored glasses back on Fandom and saying, well, see, here's David Tennant, here's here's Catherine Tate, here's bless his heart, Bernard Cribbins. We say Bernard over here. I guess you say Bernard. Bernard Cribbins. And at the end of his life, literally weeks before he dies. So it's a wonderful return. It's a welcome return. I will give the caution to Fandom that it will last 3 episodes, and that doesn't mean what comes after will be terrible. What I'm saying is, this glow will last 3 episodes, and then David Tennant will leave, because this is not 2008 anymore. We're almost 15 years later. Tennant is older. Catherine Tate is older. It is a wonderful chance to go back for a moment, but you can't live in the past, because this way lies madness. And so this is the caution that I will give to Fandom, is that this is a wonderful return, but look to the future and get ready for Ncuti Gatwa, because this is temporary. But it will be. I imagine that it will be fun, and so I'm cautiously optimistic. Certainly.
That's all we want, isn't it, Charlotte? Just a good time now, just a bit of fun.
Oh yeah, and I think the 60th needs to bask. If there's a time the show should be looking back and should be sort of happy and congratulating itself almost, it should be a 60th. But that's why I think Russell is very aware that you can't go back home, that saying, because Tennant is the 14th Doctor. He is a new incarnation. We've just got the same face. And even in the tiny bit in the trailer we saw and some of the press that has started to trickle out, this 14th Doctor isn't sure of himself. There's a line where he's like, I don't know who I am anymore. So I do think Russell is clever in the fact that he's got an actor back who he knows can play the part, who has that intrinsic knowledge, but he's also such a talented actor. And he's going to give him, I think, a real challenge writing-wise, is the feeling I'm getting.
I mean, I do think that as well as looking the same, this incarnation clearly has the same personality that he had before. I think that I don't know who I am anymore, and he gasps the way that he always gasped when he was uncovering bits about the Time War and all that kind. I think it's a similar kind of journey he'll be on.
I think he can have a similar personality, but he's going to have a very different enemy. He's going to have a very different circumstance, and I think that can make a real difference, because a Doctor, with the 10th Doctor also, we saw near the end of his run a bit of darkness, a bit of that almost a villain sort of quality. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Russell taps into that and really does want to make this incarnation, yes, have some of the traits we know, and Tennant has some very physical acting traits we all know, but he's not stupid, Russell, when it comes to characters. He knows you have to adapt, you have to evolve a character to keep it interesting. And I think he will want to do that with this 14th Doctor.
Something to get his teeth into a little bit more, Kyle?
I look at this as 2 ways. These 3 episodes, and yes, we know they're going to be 3 episodes. Think of it as you're going to how there will be some restaurants between courses will give you something to cleanse the palate. So you can, like whether it's a sherbet or something like that, you'll have that. It cleanses the palate, so you're ready to enjoy the next meal and get the full taste of that. This is what this is. This is a palate cleansing run. This is to get the taste of the last era out of our mouths and to give the next era a fresh start. And who better to fill that, be that bridge, cleanse that palate, than a phenomenal actor in David Tennant who understands the Doctor. I do think there will be aspects of the 10th Doctor that he will incorporate into the 14th Doctor. But I agree with Charlotte. I think there will be some new things we've never seen from David Tennant in his interpretation of the Doctor, maybe a darker side, because he's not sure.
Do you think he's a better actor now than he was in 2009?
Yeah. Oh yeah, infinitely.
Probably is, isn't
infinitely. I mean, just by the body of work he's done since then. I mean, we've seen him play the darker side. Look at his role as the Kilgrave in the Marvel Jessica Jones show. We've seen him do some crazy stuff like with Good Omens. So he's really flexed his acting muscles all over the place since his time leaving Doctor Who. And I think he's going, like I said, we're going to see the aspects of the 10th Doctor we love, but he's going to bring something new to this 14th Doctor. I think this is just my personal opinion and me playing guessing game. The idea of these 3 episodes is the Doctor rediscovering himself as the Doctor, rediscovering the Doctor, with ending with his regeneration into the new Doctor. That's going to reflect the Doctor finding his direction again, and we're going to have that, and then start these new adventures with the 15th Doctor. That's kind of, I think,
the simple fact is that although that's what's going on screen within the fiction, fact is sort of reflecting fiction in many respects, because that's what they're trying to promote in the audience, isn't it? I don't mean the audience like us who sit around talking about it on podcasts or on Twitter or whatever else. The viewing public, not just in Britain but all over the world, they need to be reminded why they connected with that character in the first place, why that show was appointment of view TV, why it became as big as it did, and they need reminding pretty damn quick too.
Just look at the marketing blitz that has started literally minutes after the end of the Power of the Doctor.
Have you ever,
there's been
Kyle,
more marketing for this than there was the whole 13th run.
You cover over on Culture Clash, which is the weekly flagship show of the Fandom Podcast Network that covers the whole of pop culture. And you see these things weekly, don't you? The rise and fall of intellectual properties, and how things enter the news cycle and explode and then sometimes peter out, and how things have that major effect. And when things drop, how much of a splash that they make, or the opposite. And the whole machine, how it works on the weekly, and that in the modern age, in the 21st century, it just seems to get faster and faster and faster, doesn't it? And I wondered, have you ever seen any intellectual property, any big brand, bleach itself clean as quickly as the BBC managed to do, as BBC Studios put into operation within 24 hours of the Power of the Doctor airing on BBC One on Sunday night? It was very, very quick, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, not this quick. And I find it interesting because it ties in with the other big piece of Doctor Who news that came out. When you look at the Lex, at least here in the United States, and I think Chris can back me up on this, it feels like there's really 3 to 4 tentpole franchises right now that are the only franchises that can stay in the news consistently. You have two, and 2 of them are owned by the same company. The other 2, one is kind of in a state of flux, and the other one is like what we're going to see now that has new leadership. But the 4 are Marvel, DC, Star Wars, and Star Trek. 2 of them are owned by Disney. Well, now Disney has gotten themselves, and they've been trying for a while to get themselves into the Doctor Who business. They are officially now in the Doctor Who business as the worldwide distributor outside of the UK for Doctor Who via Disney Plus. All episodes starting in 2023 will be available on Disney Plus and not aired on BBC America, or I think ABC in Australia just lost their rights to it.
That's right.
This is a huge deal because if nothing else, the Disney factor alone will now could very well keep Doctor Who in the conversation worldwide for a while, because it is now it's tied in as a partial Disney property. And so Disney's been wanting in the Doctor Who business for a while. I think they're going to be a major factor with the 60th and going forward with Doctor Who. It's going to be very interesting to see how all those relationships play out. And I know we'll talk about those on another episode, but I think it's very paramount that within 48 hours, this announcement hit as soon as Jodie. And I don't think if this was that big of a deal, they would have announced it. Was extraordinary.
Here at Type 40, we were tipped off that the rebrand was happening pretty fast. We were also aware that the diamond logo, that iconic diamond Doctor Who logo that featured on the main titles between 1974 and 1980, that would be back to lead this brand into its anniversary year. We told you that on Type 40 Live all the way back in May. So we knew about all that. But the fact that it came this quickly, it surprised absolutely everybody. This brand new but old logo at the same time with this news on Tuesday, the 25th of October, just as you said, that the BBC and Disney branded television had come together. And the intent is, Kyle, to transform Doctor Who into a global franchise for UK audiences and the rest of the world. It's a great mission statement, I think, Charlotte. It's got no fat on it. It's very clear what they're trying to do, for who and why, and the timing seems right. I understand why some people may have their reservations about this, but we're just coming out of the real doldrums here, where that show and that intellectual property in Great Britain, it's gone from being cherished to being next to forgotten. So this, to get it back not just back in the news cycle, but to connect with something latent in the hearts of British people, it's a masterstroke, wasn't it? I was being messaged about this. I was being called about this Tuesday. In fact, the calls haven't really stopped. How about you?
It's crazy because it's such a big brand, Disney. I know Disney's had its issues the last couple of years, but it still is a part of so many childhoods. It's part of so many adulthoods, like people who are still adults adore Disney property. So it is just that sort of that major name, which Who needed to help get it a bit more in the press again. I sort of got
it needs prestige again, doesn't it, Charlotte? And there is something still prestigious about the name Disney.
Oh yeah, because like I said, what they've done in the industry since the beginning. But I think there's two reasons myself why this could have happened. I think they know it's dead in America, this brand. They know that the Chibnall era, the damage it started to get in Capaldi's run, it just was even worse during Jodie's. So I think this is Russell and the BBC trying to get Americans to notice the show again. But I've been listening to some of like the press conference that they had and the little Q&A video shoot he did actually to sort of talk about the Disney deal. And he's talking about how the TARDIS can go anywhere and it can do all these amazing things and you can have such big stories. And they used the word ambition in the press event at New York. And I think this is another creative reason why this could be happening. I think Russell's got very big ideas. He's got these sort of major plans he would want to do with the show.
Well, he's always talked big about the show. Even before he came back to it, he was saying what it could be. You know, when people did manage to get there under the radar with him and get a few words out of him, because he's always been very careful not to say too much on somebody else's watch. But he would always, his eyes would light up. He said, this could be the biggest thing ever. This could be this could be that. Oh, we did that far too early. Just imagine if we did it now. You know, he's always spoken like that. Chris, a few months ago, Kyle was talking about this very thing becoming a reality. He believed, I think I'm quoting you correctly, Kyle, your exact words were that you felt that we're at a stage where Doctor Who was this big property that eventually it couldn't languish forever, and that the vultures were circling. It was only a matter of time before one of these brands, a bigger brand, swooped in and picked it up. So obviously that was what you said. But what do you think, Chris? I mean, were you shocked by the Disney involvement? Do you feel the same way that Kyle did, that this was clearly going to happen? And what are your takes as a long-term Doctor Who fan? Does this scare you?
I wasn't shocked at all. Largely because the BBC itself, I think, and you would never have thought this years ago, I think that the BBC itself is in at the least a condition where it will be in the very near future changing its structure with the ending of the TV license. And at the most, you could even see a situation where the BBC could, if not cease to exist, but maybe be broken apart. So those are situations that may not happen.
Yeah.
What is happening?
Choppy waters. Exactly.
What is happening is that the BBC on its own is not in a position, in my opinion, to carry forward Doctor Who on its own. And so it makes absolute sense that a larger corporation would be in a position to say, well, we can take it now. Yes, you have it's being done by Bad Wolf, and Sony and such, But as we've seen, in these properties, shared properties like Spider-Man, it's clearly something like Disney that really carries forward compare the quality of the creativity. Compare the success of Spider-Man No Way Home to Morbius, and even though it has Matt Smith, which I love, the Spider-Man No Way Home proved to be massively successful because it capitalized upon not only its brand but also the many iterations of its brand. Now, why do I say that? I say it because I fully suspect, not being surprised, that Disney Plus has taken the reins, because I think that they are. I think they may be silent partners, but I can guarantee you that they're going to have some share at the table, some voice at the table, so to speak. My personal opinion is that what you're going to see come out of Disney Plus is the multiverse, but not in the sense of other realities. None of the, I hate to say it, but the garbage of the timeless children, because no one cares about that. In fact, I think a lot of
Is it not though? There's a difference, isn't there, Chris? There's a massive difference between multiverse, which is an abstract fictional concept,
yes,
and franchise.
Well, that's what I mean. That's exactly what's happened. You're going to see the franchise multiply and diversify in Doctor Who going forward. Now, I don't know which forms it will take. I suspect smart money would be in an early couple of years ago. I would have said Torchwood. I don't know if that will happen exactly at this point, especially on Disney Plus. It wouldn't be the same as it was before. I would love, and again, in a perfect world, of course, it would be the Sarah Jane Adventures, but that's gone. But I suspect you will see something like Sophie Aldred, Ace's Adventures. I think the highlights, certainly, that made me a little excited, certainly was the moment where Ace pulls out her bat to the camera and says something like Wicked. So I think you'll see more with Ace. I think you'll see more with, maybe if they can sort out the rights to K9 or something. Probably Ace and K9 together.
I mean, Ace is the standout character, really. I mean, that Sophie Aldred is obviously she's an actress of age now, but she's still very physically capable. She's certainly, and I've always thought Sophie was a great actress. She's a better actress now, and there's a quality about her. There's a charisma about her. And she's still got that way with children, with a family audience too. I see her as somebody who could certainly become involved again, and perhaps on a semi-permanent basis like that, and be part of a franchise.
Well, she's the natural spiritual successor to Elizabeth Sladen.
She's also worked for Disney before as well. Yes. But we do have word. I mean, Kyle, is this what you meant all those months ago when you told me? This is what you believe would happen?
I think this is still a situation in flux, because I think the ultimate play for Disney in the long game is to eventually have ownership of Doctor Who. And I think it's coming. I just
felt a tremor of millions of Doctor Who fans going, whoa, did he really just say that out loud? Because there's nothing that Doctor Who fans are more frightened about right now on social media than that.
But here's the aspect of it, though. And this is something I've learned watching how Disney's handled their two major purchases in the last couple of decades with Star Wars and Marvel. Disney went all in on Star Wars, thinking we're going to create this Star Wars to be something with us. We've bought this all from George. It's been down. It's been out. We're going to create it. We're going to create our own characters. Kind of, I don't want to say ignore the past, but just going in their direction that they wanted to go. And it didn't work. For infinite number of reasons. Now you have like the Mandalorian and what the things they're doing with Disney Plus, Star Wars on Disney Plus, which the Mandalorian is huge, but they've let the creators create. When Disney bought Marvel, especially Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige was in place. Things were going along with Marvel, and Disney, for the most part, has let Kevin Feige run it. And there's been tumultuous times. Bob Chapek, when he first came in, wanted Kevin Feige gone, and he couldn't do it. Because Kevin Feige brings them in billions of dollars a year. He puts out, we need $1 billion. Okay, let me put out a movie. That's basically how it goes. With Doctor Who, I think Disney's maybe learned its lesson in some cases, to where the main heart of Who, especially if Russell is part of this, and I think he is. I think Russell is a very big part of this, because I think he's going to end up being the guy. He is going to be the ultimate shepherd of Doctor Who going forward. I think he is being put in place to run Doctor Who.
It seems to be the case to me that obviously Russell is coming up to his own 60th birthday, This is a man who recently was named sort of the third most powerful person in British media, the whole of British media, including writers, producers, directors, casting agents, everybody. He's a big figure. And whilst I can't see him running this show indefinitely, I think he'll be showrunning it for quite a long time. And even if he's not in place as showrunner, will remain creatively involved in the show and with Bad Wolf for the foreseeable future, maybe into his what we would usually call a retirement.
What I think we're going to see happen on the Disney end of it, and this is where I don't see it immediately, because again, Disney does not own the property right now. Yes, they probably have some input. They probably have that. So that they're very high on Ncuti. It's not coincidence that the press conference was in New York and Ncuti was part of the press conference in the marketing. That's been there. Disney's very high on Ncuti. They like Ncuti, and I think they have plans for him. I think he's somebody they approve of as the Doctor. I think what you're going to see is what you're going to see happen with the Disney and the Doctor is you could eventually see where Davis goes back to when he was trying to create spinoffs like Torchwood. And then when Moffat was there, some of the spinoffs they also tried to do there with Class and a few other things. I think you'll start seeing that, but I think you're also going to see, I wouldn't be surprised to see something animated for Doctor Who. Disney doing an animated thing for Doctor Who to try to get a younger audience in that way. And
well, I think Chris hit the nail on the head when he mentioned the fact that up until say 3 or 4 years ago, and that Comic-Con that we talk about where Jodie Whittaker made her debut, that was the BBC trying to, I don't say they were faking it until they made it, but they were making all the noise and keeping the frame of being an international broadcaster. But the simple fact is that international broadcasting has left the BBC behind. They're massively out of their depth. And in that whole arena of streaming platforms and big studios, they're insignificant, they're lost. They don't know how to not just talk on those terms, but to think on those scales. And I think that's why Bad Wolf, I think that Bad Wolf effectively threw this brand a lifeline. No wonder the BBC sort of grabbed it with both hands and handed over creative control mostly to Bad Wolf and their judgment. But getting into bed and being able to throw out this graphic with the BBC logo next to the Disney logo there, some of that prestige. And I know there's people probably scoffing out there because I'm well aware of the situation with Disney, but Disney are a big deal. There's no way of getting around that. You know, we can talk about the ins and outs of it and decisions they've made and even people that are in the equation there. You can talk about that until the cows come home. But purely optics-wise, Disney are a prestigious brand, probably the biggest brand in entertainment. So for the BBC to be seen to be on the same graphic there, that's where they want to be, but they couldn't get there. They couldn't hope to get there on their own. They don't have the imagination. They don't have the money. And in recent years, they have lost the affection and the support of the British public too. And so had Doctor Who.
I think the other thing will be a very big reveal of how deep Disney is in with this Doctor Who thing will be later on in 2023 when Disney's D23 event happens, where they really market a lot of stuff. It's got. Because I have a feeling I would not be surprised Ncuti showing up at that event. We have a quote. We have some quotes. We've got the Telegraph. They spoke to the BBC about this, and the BBC said, spokesperson said, the BBC retain editorial control of future seasons, and so the tone and content will not deviate from the canon of Doctor Who. The broadcaster also retains the intellectual property rights, so Disney will be unable to produce spin-offs or any other material based around the concept. It's under a shared creative vision. They will deliver this quintessentially British show to future generations on an unprecedented scale, with Disney Plus as that exclusive home for new seasons of Doctor Who outside the UK and Ireland. So I'm drawn now to that connected sentence there, Charlotte, that says, under a shared creative vision. There was an initial belief that this was just a distribution deal. It is for the most part, but it does turn out it is a co-production deal. But the simple fact of the matter is that Doctor Who has had co-producers throughout the entire life of the new series, and even the TV movie, they had co-producers, overseas co-producers then as well. So have we got to keep this in perspective? What do you think?
I think there's a couple of things. I think Disney's very aware that this is a British show, that this has got British blood running through it. And I think they'll know if they make it too American, the inbuilt British audience will smell that and they will not like it and they will reject it. I think that's what happened with the TV movie back with Paul McGann. This show has to keep British, and I think Disney's very aware of that. Like I said, even at that press event, they kept talking about it being a British show, British institution. Ncuti said that a lot in the press. So I think they're very aware of that. But I think
that's a selling point.
Yes, if nothing else, it's a selling point. That's what I'm thinking. Because British television is very different to American television. And I think that they want to have that variety and that they can sort of showcase, look at us, we've got so many different types of shows and different directors and writers that have very different takes on things. But a creative vision could just mean that when Bad Wolf or Russell, whoever is making the calls, it might just literally mean that Disney just gets a listen and they might be able to say at the most, oh, maybe, what do you think of this idea? But it's fully going to be in control of Russell and Bad Wolf for them to either go, okay, we might incorporate that, or no.
Well, in some ways, Charlotte, in some ways, Disney and Doctor Who seem like natural bedfellows. The family appeal of the show, right from as it was conceived, right from '63, and what was always traditionally, not drawing on controversial recent times, what was traditionally the appeal, the remit of Disney. I mean, Kyle, I look at a show like Star Wars Andor, and to me, that looks so British. There's so many British actors on it, for example. The bulk of it was filmed in Great Britain as well, and it has that kind of slightly dour tone to it. I like the fact that they're innovating with Star Wars, whether one could argue how successful each innovation has been. But they're not being lazy with Star Wars. And potentially, whilst I have no doubt that the bulk of the creative drive of this will come from Russell and come from Bad Wolf, they're the ones, it's cost them the money. And Sony are in the equation. Sony are in it up to their necks over at Bad Wolf. They practically own Bad Wolf. So I view Disney as the ones who are going to be owning the least in this and having the least say by some way. But do you think that could change in time?
I think that's going to change in time.
Because Sony are the just worldwide... as big as Disney, though, aren't they? Globally.
Disney's. Here's the thing: when you become the worldwide distributor of something, you're going to get a seat at the table. There's no. Oh wow, we're going to distribute that, but you're going to have full say in what.
Because Sony don't have a streaming platform, do they?
Yeah. Sony is not the company they once were. I mean, let's be honest. If that Venom movie from a few years back doesn't succeed, Spider-Man rights probably are back fully in Disney's hands. That's a whole other thing. But the aspect of it is there's a couple of floating pieces still around. HBO Max still has all the prior seasons to Doctor Who of the modern era. And that's still the case. Sony, all Disney's getting right now is new episodes going forward starting in 2023. So what happens to that piece when the HBO Max contract expires? What happens to these classic Doctor Who episodes that are just kind of floating around everywhere on different streaming services? Hell, Pluto TV has a whole channel that's nothing but classic Doctor Who. So if somehow over the next few years we see Disney just kind of conglomerate everything there as far as distribution rights, it's only a matter of time before they have some kind of full ownership stake in Doctor Who. But again, I think this all floats to, you have BBC here, you have Disney here, and you have Russell T Davies and Bad Wolf sitting right there as the sun that they're all orbiting, because he is in control of the property as far as the directions, the stories, and things like that are happening. And he's going to, I think it's Russell T Davies' goal is to, one, make Doctor Who worldwide again. He wants to get that bridge connection that at the height of it during the Matt Smith run between the US and Doctor Who. And two, I think whether it's working in with Disney, working with Sony, with somebody, I can foresee in a 5-year period where the BBC no longer owns Doctor Who because of the BBC's own issues right now, how the television landscape in your country is changing.
Or they become the sleeping partners.
Yeah. They become the background. The BBC is just another icon on there to represent the iconicness of BBC and Doctor Who, but the mouse is in control.
So I'm just going to give the listener a couple of moments because they will be reading from that there. You'd be all right. You're right with us here at Type 40. We'll give you a couple of seconds to get over that. So generally speaking, Chris, how do you feel about the news? Positive, negative, or somewhere in between?
It's a very good question. I will say, to preface my answer, I will say I agree with everything that everyone is saying about what's happening, the current state of who controls the levers of power in Doctor Who. I fully agree with Kyle that this is the end game, that Disney will one day own all of Doctor Who, and you will see that I 100% agree with him. Once you see the status, the condition of the migration of the other episodes of Doctor Who, if you start to see the McKeon film, the more recent new series episodes on Disney Plus, and the classic series, absolutely. If you see that happen, then there's no doubt. Or at least the wheels are already turning. But in terms of how I feel, well,
yeah, just as a fan,
it's the opposite, I suppose. I feel of how of my feelings of watching Power of the Doctor. It's not ambivalence; it's a hollow feeling, and that doesn't mean it's negative. It just means very much. Tipping point, I suppose. Do
you think fans are punch drunk from change after change after change? We just want a bit of stability and consistency of product.
Fandom itself is so fractured and divisive right now that it is a perfect storm of that. That's an answer that will be different for almost any individual. You will have some fans that want change every moment. You will have some fans that want permanent stability. You will have some fans that are open to anything. You will have some fans that will leave the show and won't come back. I guarantee you one thing, that this is certainly a tipping point time of change. There are a lot of people, and this includes myself to a certain extent, that have seen what Disney has done to properties like Star Wars. I personally felt that the sequels should never have been made. And I'm grateful for things that are being made that are being produced out of Disney Plus on the Star Wars front to a certain extent. I enjoyed The Mandalorian. I wasn't terribly fond of Obi-Wan Kenobi. I wasn't terribly fond of the Book of Boba Fett. If there is any concern that I have when it comes to Doctor Who being made by Disney, is that it will be hit and miss, very likely. If the model remains the same, if it's in the same time frame that the people that are currently at Disney Plus, let's put it in a scenario like this. We say Disney Plus ultimately were to take charge of Doctor Who right now. I would have terrible concerns because I'm not terribly secure in my thoughts that they can produce a consistent and quality product in every corner. Andor seems to be interesting. I haven't seen it, but you also think of their major product in the MCU. And I am definitely of the opinion that the quality of the MCU, I'll put it this way, I liken the MCU to Doctor Who in terms of at its 50th anniversary. A whole layer of fans, I think, to a certain extent, left Doctor Who, not because they were casual, because the story was over. Gallifrey was back, you had the 50th anniversary, there was a regeneration and such, the storyline ended. Endgame was the ending of a storyline for the MCU. Since then, the quality of the products are at the least flux, but I think that they are somewhat in a decline. Now, there is a difficulty in a major franchise, like a major conglomerate like Disney Plus, taking over a 60-year-old franchise, which is that for any fandom that exists, it is already, you could argue, something like Doctor Who, in a decline. Is it a terminal decline? At the beginning of the Jodie Whittaker era, I said yes, because there was no end in sight, and and the quality of the episodes were very terrible. On the flip side, because Russell T Davies is I will hesitate here too. There will be one thing I will say about this. I have learned through sad experience of hearing on the Hollywood side of things over here, remember I'm from Los Angeles, and on the American side of things, that when you say a property will be good because it has a name attached, I'm thinking of J.J. Abrams and his shepherding of the Star Trek franchise in the films and the Star Wars franchise. When you hear someone say, it is such and such a person running it, therefore it must be good, you're starting to edge into the sense of a cult of personality, and therefore it's infallible, and therefore it must be perfect. I will simply say this as a caution to fandom. Have a healthy dose of skepticism. Hold these people to the fire and make sure they give you a wonderful product. Because if you just simply fall into the cult of personality of Russell T Davies, which was happening, lest we forget, 15 years ago, people forget that even at the end of the Russell T Davies era, there was a growing sense of, this is a big word, hagiography, which is self-love, self-promotion. The episode, there was a background sense. It wasn't in the foreground too much, but there was a background sense. If you watch Doctor Who Confidential, increasing sense of, oh, we are so wonderful, we have done such great things. And I felt that even Russell T Davies' tail end suffered for it. I do not feel the 2009 specials were terribly good. And I don't think that the End of Time was very good. It was hype. There was a hype carrying even the end of the Tennant years. So I will give that caution to fandom. We've learned through that experience. If you ride on hype alone, Jodie Whittaker will be wonderful. Chris Chibnall will be wonderful, just because they will be wonderful. It's like, I will give you an example in Doctor Who, just a very quick example.
Well, you're saying it could necessarily be the same with Disney too?
Yes, absolutely. It could become empty. The example I have in Doctor Who is simply from Enlightenment with the White Guardian. There's no story behind him. When the Fifth Doctor says to Tegan, "Watch for the White Guardian signal," and Tegan says, "Well, what's the White Guardian?" The Doctor's answer is, "Watch for the signal." There is no answer. There's no substance behind those characters. That's my concern here, and that would be the way forward. I would absolutely say is hold your franchise to the fire of fandom honesty, and say we want good stories. We don't want personalities only running this show, because when you reach that point, and if you just go trust in only the name, Russell T Davies or Disney or whatever, and you let it ride without that sense of fandom creative control, if you exclude fandom from the table, which was done from almost day one of the Jodie Whittaker, Chris Chibnall debacle, you have a catastrophe that takes years to clean up. If you ridicule your fandom, if you revile your fandom, if you exclude your fandom, and I think that there's still a danger of this, if you tell your fandom from the beginning, certain parts of your fandom, you are not welcome, then the series deserves to die. Now, I am sorry to say in such terms, but I am venting a little bit. Over the last 5 years, we've heard that. Doctor Who's Jodie Whittaker era deserved to die on arrival, and it deserves to be an autopsy on departure. I do not want this to be the case for the Disney Plus era. The pieces are in place still that it could be. That is out of my control, and I will let things lie there. I will just simply reiterate this point. Do not show hatred for your fans. They buy the creators your children's shoes. They give you a job. Remember what Peter Capaldi said when he was announced as the 12th Doctor. It moved me almost to tears when he said it now nearly 10 years ago. Doctor Who is worthy because Doctor Who belongs to all of us. All of us made Doctor Who. It does not belong to Russell T Davies. It does not belong even in the legal sense, whatever, but does not belong spiritually to Disney Plus. It does not belong to the BBC. It does not belong to the showrunner, who will come and go long after we forget even the names. It belongs to the fandom. If you lose sight of this, your series deserves to die.
I do agree with the bulk of that, certainly. Back up to date with the power of the Doctor. We have to do this. It's a Doctor Who podcast. We have to acknowledge the fact that the ratings were in for the Power of the Doctor special there. They aired on Sunday, October the 23rd on BBC One. That's where it premiered, of course. And then it's the first one that didn't get simulcast. The first and the last. It sounds like simulcasting could be a thing of the past with Disney Plus going forward. So yes, overnight figure for this episode of Doctor Who was up on that cataclysmic figure that Legend of the Sea Devils had, that 2.2 million on the overnights. It was up to 3.7 million there for the Power of the Doctor for the bulk of the episode, but that did peak in that final 3 minutes where they got a big bump there of yes, a reasonable bump. Just over 4.4 million were there to watch it at its peak for those closing couple of minutes to see David Tennant appear as the 14th Doctor. And the entire episode achieved that audience appreciation index figure of 82, which is again up on pretty much all of Flux, I think, and up there with some of the higher ones of the Whittaker era. But whether that would be the case if it hadn't have ended with David Tennant stood there at the edge of that cliff, I think it's highly, highly unlikely. As for us, I was wondering what you guys made of it all. Where would you rate the power of the Doctor? How many incarnations out of 5 would you give this one, Kyle?
I'm gonna give this one a 3 out of 5. I think there were some solid ideas in there that didn't get executed well, and I think that a lot of the bringing back the classic characters and some of the moments we had really were good moments. And obviously, it being the end of the Jodie era gives it a bump up on its own. So I mean, it's definitely not the worst episode. It's Sasha Darwin is also amazing in this. So I think a solid 3 out of 5 is regenerations out of 5 is a good way to go for this one.
3 out of 5. How about you, Charlotte? How many out of 5 do you score the Power of the Doctor after all that stuff and nonsense, noise, and calamity?
There was good bits in isolation. If I were to just take certain scenes out, I could happily watch them again. There were good writing in bits. There was good acting in bits, but that's my issue. Everything was in bits that I liked. It wasn't a running through experience watching it because, as we've talked about, it was so everywhere. It was so messy. It was so just things happen because Chris needed them to, like characters popping up. And Sasha, though he was a massive highlight. So I'll put it 2.5 because I can't quite go to 3 because of the overall script issues.
Very generous. How about you, Chris? Where do you score this one? How many incarnations out of 5 do you give the Power of the Doctor there, that final Jodie Whittaker episode?
After my controlled emotional rant, it's difficult to give it a. I'll start with what I don't give it. I don't give it a 5 because it's not nowhere. It's nowhere near that. I certainly don't give it a 4. And I wish that I could be generous and put it in the middle ground, like as the others have, and for good reason. So I'm glad that they can be the more positive views on this. I want to give it a number, I want to give it a number, but for me, it'll almost sound too harsh if I give it a 0, because I'm not sure if it really deserves that. I might just give it a 1 just because. I will give it a 1 because it's better than the abomination, frankly, of something like Legend of the Sea Devils or Orphan 55 or maybe even Arachnids in the UK. It exists and it's something, but it's empty and it's dead for me, and that's why I even want to say almost a 0 just because this episode was very for me. Very
well done. You made it to the screen. It's like a participation prize.
Yeah, if I were to be a jerk about it, I would say, "Oh, can you give me a negative number?" But no, I don't want to blast this era so mercilessly or so unkindly. But I cannot give it anything more than it exists. And I remember because I just watched it only less than 12 hours ago. But it is simply an event that is over, and we move towards other things. But I'm going. I don't know if I can give you a 0 or a 1. It's a dead issue to me. It is a dead episode to me. I'll give it a 1. I will give it a 1. I will say this: what is the saving grace about this episode? Believe it or not. Yes, you see the classic Doctors and such, but I think that they could have done more with them. It is Sophie Alders' ace. And so I'm going to give, if you gave me just the Sophie, as Charlotte said, just remove the Sophie Alders scenes, those would be a 5, because she was fantastic in this. and I really wish that we can get to see her in her own, leading her own series. I would watch that in a heartbeat. Not even a Time Lord heart speed. I would watch it in just my own feeble, well, I have a feeble heart speed. I would watch that. So I will give it a 1 for the saving grace alone of Sophie Aldred. And that's
wow.
but not Jodie Whittaker. I'm sorry to say no. But Sophie Aldred, yes, it's a 1.
I'm going to give this one. I'm going to be generous this time. I haven't been of late, and with good reason, but I'm going to give the power of the Doctor. I'm going to give this 2 out of 5. And I've got to be honest, one of those is for reminding me how much I love Boney M. But yeah, it's a 2 out of 5 from me. But that's very much a charity score, because I do want to let bygones be bygones with Chris Chibnall and certainly with Jodie Whittaker as they all disappear off into the sunset there. And as Doctor Who itself moves on, I really don't want to harp on it anymore. And I did get the feeling, I did at least enjoy this one in some part, and I do get the feeling that at some, even if it wasn't audible, that fault was being admitted, albeit far too little, far too late. The Power of the Doctor is up on the iPlayer, the BBC iPlayer, to relive over and over again. Yes, you too can find out yet more things that were wrong with the Power of the Doctor at your leisure on the iPlayer. It's coming to DVD and Blu-ray on the 14th of November. You can get that in a steelbook too, so you can get a set that's just got the Power of the Doctor in, with some exclusive features, such as a farewell to Jodie Whittaker and Mandip Gill. Good God. And a behind-the-scenes special and an audio commentary. So you can have that, or you can get the Doctor Who Series 13 specials. That's also out as a Blu-ray. So that's all 3 specials that have aired since New Year's Day. So we're talking Eve of the Daleks, Legend of the Sea Devils, and The Power of the Doctor, all collected there in a steelbook with really beautiful artwork on the front. And again, some more bonus features are there. That's all out on the 14th of November there for the completists amongst us. But that is the old girl starting up and calling time on another edition of Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast. I'll be back with another one soon. Look out for that wherever you found this. It could have been on the dedicated home feed for Type 40. That's over at type40.podbean.com. Or maybe we rolled up on the podcatcher of your choice. We're scattered across them all. So I'm talking Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbay, all of those places where you get your podcasts, or you can find us at Podbean. That's on the Podbean app. Of course, we're still on the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network's own master feed with all those other shows. Some of them aren't even hosted by Kyle. Some of those other shows that are coming at you there, never mind on the weekly, it's coming at you on the daily. Please consider a trip sideways in time to the Fandom Podcast Network. And we're also on YouTube. Of course, we're on the Spacebook channel. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, we're out there on social media. Maybe you disagree with us drastically about all of this. Maybe you've got a lot to say about the Power of the Doctor. What do you think we've missed about that episode? Or maybe we're bang on the mark. What do you think about the Disney Plus story? Let us know. Get in touch through our social media, Instagram and Twitter at Type40 Doctor Who. Or you can email us, type40doctorwho@gmail.com. And if you're feeling really, really brave, head over to the Type 40 Facebook group. If you've got a bit of time on your hands there, that's where they're going. Head over to the Type 40 Facebook group over on Facebook, and there you'll find regenerations upon regenerations worth of Doctor Who fans who are talking about classic Doctor Who. And maybe they're giving their autopsy on new Doctor Who, and certainly looking forward to all new Doctor Who with David Tennant, Ncuti Gatwa, Russell T Davies, and Disney Plus maybe. So much to talk about. It's all going on in the Type 40 Facebook group. Chris, thank you for your company. Obviously, Black Glove, you've got plenty planned over there, haven't you? Particularly for the anniversary year. So where can people get the first word on everything that's coming out of Black Glove Studio on social media and whatnot?
Thank you for asking. You can find us at our main site right now is through Twitter. As long as it lasts, who knows? And it's through It's called Black Glove Studio, and the tag handle is at Studio Glove with a capital S and a capital G. We released the final game. We're in the process of re-releasing a story called The Misshapen Planet with the Hartnell Doctor and the Butterworth Monk. We are very much looking forward to the pre-production of Yellow Fever and How to Cure It, the lost Colin Baker season 23 story, finishing the Sarah Jane Adventures Series 5, and a very special thing with the Brigadier. And a little tribute upcoming for the 80th anniversary, the 80th birthday of Colin Baker. So we'll look for something there soon, too.
Our mouths are wetty, so they can find you over on Twitter for all of that. And the productions, when they do drop, they go onto SoundCloud, don't they? That's right.
Yes.
There you go. I thought so. And have you got a YouTube channel for that as well?
There's a YouTube channel called Studio Severn.
That's it. I thought there was one.
Yes, and we may have a dedicated, build a new dedicated Blacklist Studio channel on YouTube soon too.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And how about you, Charlotte? Where can people connect with you on social media and hear more of what you've got to say about all things Whoniverse?
Well, you'll hear me on Type 40 Live on Thursdays and on the Type 40 podcast.
As simple as that. There. Kyle, what's going on with you over at the Fandom Podcast Network across those other shows? And where can people get in touch with you on social media?
Well, as far as what's going on with the Fandom Podcast Network, it's actually an interesting time. It's kind of a little bit of slowdown in content right now because a lot of things have come to an end. We recently hit the end of House of Dragon and Rings of Power. Marvel's kind of on a little break with just Black Panther wrapping up here for there, and the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special. So True Believers is going to be a little bit quiet, but we got some things in the works with some of our flashback and vintage shows such as Time Warp and Couch Potato Theater. You can find those, of course, all on the master audio feed for the Fandom Podcast Network at fpnet.podbean.com. Of course, we have our YouTube channel as well. Just go to YouTube and search for the Fandom Podcast Network. If you want to find out more of what I'm thinking personally, you can follow me on Twitter at @KyleW or on Instagram at @KyleFandom, or you can also follow the Fandom Podcast Network on Twitter at FanPod Network.
Wow. And obviously, as always, that will all be in the show notes of the podcast and the description to the video track too. You can catch me on Instagram and Twitter as the Spacebook, where I'm wheezing and groaning and ranting and raving about all things geeky inside and outside of the TARDIS, whatever catches my eye, my imagination, or both. There, I'm going on about that, and a little bit of day-to-day real life too, whatever passes through the old stream of consciousness. And you can find out how hyped I am or not about the Disney Plus thing. I think that my mind is changing about that practically by the hour, but this is a very exciting time to be a Doctor Who fan in general, I think. And I'm very much looking forward to the anniversary year, everything we're going to bring you on Type 40. It's a long wait until the next actual episode of Doctor Who yet again, but I know there's going to be much to enjoy between now and then. So a little bird says, but that's it for this time. Thank you guys for joining me for this one, for the very last review of the final episode of the Jodie Whittaker era of Doctor Who. God, it feels so good to say that. And thanks to you for listening. We always have the time if you have the space here at Type 40, but that's it for this time. And for that era, we'll speak to you all again soon. Bye-bye.